To all of the attendees who are joining us right now, welcome. We're just going to take a minute more to wait for everyone to log on, and then we'll start. Okay, with that, let's begin. A very, very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shloka Nath, and I'm the Executive Director of the India Climate Collaborative. So the ICC, as we refer to it, is India's first ever collective response by business and philanthropy to enable climate action. The ICC is hosting the climate track at Charcha 2020, and this evening marks our very first session at Charcha 2020. So welcome. The session is titled Climate Finance for Development Outcomes, a Renewed Imperative. So a ferocious pandemic is sweeping the world, threatening lives and livelihoods. And as infection and death rates continue to rise, resident movement is restricted, economic activity is curtailed, and governments are scrambling to adjust. Amid these disruptions, it's easy to forget the other pressing issue that is looming before us that could impact India just as much as COVID-19, and that's climate change. Today's panel is going to seek to explore the mechanisms for India's recovery, steps towards building back more resilient with a focus on green and inclusive growth. What's the role of finance in ensuring we achieve longer-term, more sustainable development outcomes? We're lucky to be joined tonight by a truly remarkable panel. They're all stalwarts in the house. And we're led tonight by our moderator, Mahua Acharya. Mahua leads the Asian operations of the Climate Policy Institute, our partner for this session. CPI is a not-for-profit agency focused on financial solutions for climate change. Mahua has over 15 years of international experience, having lived and worked in the US, in Korea, and in Europe. And she joined CPI from GGGI, where she was its Assistant Director General and established an investment division that worked across 16 countries and mobilized nearly $500 million USD of financing commitments. So with that, thank you all for being here. Mahua, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shloka. Thank you so much to ICC and to the Charcha Foundation. Thank you for having this panel. Shloka, it's a true privilege to be able to run the first panel on climate for this. So thank you once again. Let me also just thank my panelists. This was put together really, really short notice. I know many of you have events before this and an event right after this. So really, thank you for accepting to do this panel with me. We've got a very, very interesting lineup of people. And I think that this time I can definitely say that each one is very, very passionate about their work, extremely energetic and visionary. And there's at least one person on this panel that I've not met. I've only had the opportunity to speak with them once before this panel. And I can still say that. Very, very good lineup. And I'm looking forward to this session with all of you and with Shloka. So I thought the way we'll run this panel, it's always a little bit of a challenge to run webinars like this, where I can't see, as a moderator, I can't see who's in the room, but we'll make do. I might ask panel members perhaps to just introduce themselves. We will run this, we've got 90 minutes, may not need the entire 90 minutes. It was very kind of Charcha Foundation to give us this entire slot. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, and there's a couple of questions that I thought we'll just keep this as a free-flowing discussion. I'll ask each of you a few questions that relate to, in particular, climate finance and development outcome in particular. And then we open the floor up. I have to all the participants, there's a screen in front of me. So as and when you want to send in your questions, just know that the screen is in front of me and I should be able to field them accordingly. So should we start? Harish, would you like to start? Just give us a little 2-3 line intro to all of you. We'll do Harish, Saurabh, Ambassador Travik, and Vineet. So if we do this in that order, we go back to the first set of questions for Harish. Harish, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Maho, for this, and thanks, Loka, for putting this up. Yeah, my name is Harish Hande. I belong to an organization called Selco, which pushes sustainable energy as a leverage to catalyze or to democratize the delivery of health, education, and livelihoods. That's what my organization does, and I belong to. And my claim to fame is that I'm a friend of Vineet Rai. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Harish. Thank you. Saurabh, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mawat. Thank you, Shloka, for inviting me here. My name is Saurabh Kumar. I work for Energy Efficiency Services Limited. We have been doing a host of energy efficiency projects in the country and also outside. And now we have shifted focus on many other things like electric mobility, smart meters, gas-based cooling and hot water, and so on and so forth. So very happy to be here and look forward to the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Saurabh. Would you like to go next?
Thank you, Marwan. Good to see you, albeit only virtually, and good to meet all the others as well. Thank you for inviting me to this. So my name is Stig Travik. I'm a special envoy for Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative. Basically, what we do is that we try to engage with tropical forest countries, both on the policy level, but also by using finance in an innovative way to protect as much of the remaining rainforest in the world as possible. So that's my day job. I have previously been the Norwegian ambassador to Indonesia, and I have been chief of staff to our Minister of Development, and I previously also worked in Afghanistan, in West Africa, and in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That is very diverse. Thank you for that, and thank you for agreeing to come on this panel at short notice. Vineet?
Okay, I'll start with a namaskar. These days during COVID times, this is probably the best way to engage with people. My name is Vineet Rai. I am the founder of Avishkar Group. We believe that there are ways to create opportunities to help the people in the lower economic strata to be able to deal with the situation on their own. So harness entrepreneurial zeal to build businesses that actually serve the interest of low-income population. And I have already been massively honored by the Magsaysay Award winner, Harish Hande, saying that he knows me. So I think I rest my case there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Vineet. I think I can definitely then say that my claim to fame would be to know all of you on this panel for now. So thank you for that. The stars we have here. So let me start with let me ask Harish. We'll start with Harish. The idea of this panel was to have somewhat of a conversation on climate finance and a development outcome. And development outcome, I say, from the point of view of life having changed after COVID, life particularly having changed for especially those that are, for those of you in India, you'll see there's scores of labor communities that are still on the road making their way back home. So life has changed for a lot of people, and life has changed for a lot of industries. There is a discussion going on in Europe that is about building back our society in a more resilient way, and the use of money in certain ways over others. That conversation rests very differently when you're talking to a laborer who has perhaps lost his job versus a hospitality industry that has perhaps lost business, and everything else that falls in between. So maybe I thought I will start with Harish. I know, Harish, through your career, you have been dealing with a demographic that I think I can say perhaps earns, less than $5 a day and perhaps even less than $2 a day. This is a demographic that has been affected quite badly with COVID. And many of these are your clients that you've been dealing with over time. So if you were asked to rebuild their livelihoods in a climate resilient kind of way, what would you suggest, or how would you say that this group has been affected, or from where you're sitting, where does climate fall for them?
Thanks, Mama, for that. I think the COVID-19, in a very unfortunate manner, has opened up the fissures or the gap that already existed for many of the people. We are talking of people who've been earning very meager amounts and who are in the strata of very poor and abject poverty. See, also you need to realize that many of them have actually moved to so-called urban areas is also because of climate. Because if you look at the droughts and the floods and the drudgery that actually related to many of the people in families, there are no option B to look at. If I have a continuous drought for 3 years, I have continuous floods for 3 years. My climate was one of the primary reasons why they shifted. I'm saying I don't want my son to do what I am doing. Let him or her go to urban areas. And unfortunately, we have not, it's a big relation to what is happening today of people returning is that two things. One, a lot of them were earlier climate refugees. Number two, it also showed that it was an economic opportunity, but absolutely zero safety nets that were created for the poor who actually migrated to urban areas. The moment we did not need them, we threw them out in a sense that there were no safety nets that were created in the urban or economic. We just threw them out and say, because we need you when we need physical labor when it opens up. So it's a use and throw policy of, and so the government is doing its best and everybody else is doing their best, but the safety nets that private, the civil society, everybody, we all responsible for what is happening. Let's not put blame on each other. We are all responsible. I also sometimes question the development money that has gone into what has happened to that. So many that we didn't build the safety net. So I would say today it's an opportunity for us to create democratization of entrepreneurship and innovation in the farm and non-farm sector, and looking at creating islands of innovation of 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, saying that how do we work on innovation? How would I put in finance, money, failure monies in innovation of agriculture and allied services in the rural areas, whether it is farming, pottery, or silk weaving or anything else, create appropriate market linkages at the local areas, established. So if you look at the development of Europe and US over the years has been because of vocational schools. Rather than creating only centers of innovation in elite schools like IITs, can we create ITIs and root sets of centers of innovation and entrepreneurship into those vocational schools, put in lot of failure money. Because today, me and Vineet can raise money one way or the other because we speak English, right? We get failure monies to experiment with. Non-English speakers have no chance. So I would say, can we put in failure money into these ITIs so that the people who have been affected are the people who become innovators, right? And today they own the problem. So I would say, how do we create centers of innovation and entrepreneurship at 100, 150 kilometers radius so people don't need to migrate, don't need to be shunted out of cities when crises such things happen. So we have a chance both from social inclusivity, also from climate resilience, that we have a chance to look at, because these are very interrelated. People say they're different. I'm sorry, they're not different. They're very, very interrelated.
Thank you for that, Harish. Just for the benefit of the audience that perhaps is not from India, even for the benefit of STIG, we have a situation in India right now that I actually saw a study this morning that about 80% of workers in urban areas have lost their jobs. Many of them, and this is many, many days into the lockdown, have not yet reached their homes, meaning these people were coming in from the farms and from smaller towns and working in the large metro cities. So the background that Harish was talking about, that we should be building up something. We should be building up if I can say not necessarily or not just strictly limited to urban areas, building up the farm, non-farm sectors. This is the particular demographic that is now acutely affected. In fact, this is a nice little link up to a question I had for Saurabh, because now Saurabh, you sit from a government of India lens in a public sector implementing company. And many of the government's initiatives, in fact, target things like this, target the, where in the parlance of impact investment, it's called the last mile. It tends to be the last mile vocabulary. So if you were, how do you see this now? Harish raised this very, very nicely, that we've got to build elsewhere so we don't have this mass migration going on in the urban areas. How do you see that developing, and how do you see it from a sort of climate point of view?
Thanks, Nova. I mean, I completely agree with what Harish says, and there is a need to refocus, revisit whatever has been done. And if you ask me what has been done in the rural infrastructure, I wouldn't say anything much really has been done in terms of virtually everything, whether we just were able to reach the last mile in terms of electricity connectivity. But look at the other amenities that you have. I mean, do we have proper schools? Do we have proper colleges that Harish talks about? Or the infrastructure per se, I mean, public lighting in rural areas. And also, if you look at what is the kind of, I mean, given that the incomes in the rural areas are far and few, what is the kind of expenditure for the new people who just got hooked onto an electricity connection? So as we see it, this pandemic and its aftermath, and the fact that a lot of public money will no longer be available for perhaps these kind of activities, I see a climate finance playing a very, very critical developmental role, particularly in strengthening the rural infrastructure and strengthening it in a manner which is climate resilient, which is in a sustainable and clean. Just to give an example, we in ESL we distributed LED bulbs across the country, and it became one of the largest programs anywhere in the world. We didn't take or wanted any subsidy. The bulbs were distributed across the country, and almost 362 million bulbs were distributed, close to $1 per bulb. When we look at our data, just about 20% of the bulbs were actually distributed or taken up by the rural household, because for them, even $1 investment in a lighting device is very, very high. So will be the case if you really want to sustain the rural economy in people in the rural areas, looking at other equipments which we are used to, fans, air conditioners, and so on and so forth. Can we channelize climate finance, A, to ensure that the rural households get the most energy efficient equipments, which helps overall sustainability, and as well as reducing their own costs? B, can we use distributed renewable energy with storage? And now that we are looking at costs which are actually lower than the cost of thermal power and any other power that is used, can we sharpen our focus on creating these small decentralized solar plants near the villages, get them with storage, and provide a host of services, including perhaps a mini grid form of electricity to the rural household, providing public lighting and many other public services, which perhaps would complement what Harish says, is to make those people feel as if they don't really need to go out and fend for themselves and fall into a net which does not have any safety. So I think we need programs, we need sharp focus on rural infrastructure, and we need to leverage finances from climate. Mm-hmm. And also, if any other philanthropic organization or set of organizations will wish to do this as a part of CSR or whatever else. So I think there's an enormous scope for such investments in the rural areas.
That's great, Saurabh. Thank you for that. I'll come back to this in a minute. There are questions that have come up already on financing, but let me come back on this when I just, in fact, I just want to ask Stig, because this also plays in very nicely into some of the questions that I had for Stig. And I must assure the audience that this was not choreographed. Let me ask you, in your career, you've been in countries that have a large population of low income demographic. Liberia, Afghanistan, more recently Indonesia, and I know you've traveled around to a lot of these countries where COVID has affected them. COVID has affected a lot of people COVID has affected Indonesia now beyond just Jakarta. And in your current, just from where you sit currently, and I know that the Norwegian government and the Ministry of Climate and Forest in particular, very, very keen to see that carbon finance in particular goes a long way in livelihood improvement. So how do you see this discussion panning out now post-COVID when it comes to this segment of the population?
Yeah, if I may, I would like to sort of pick up a little bit on what was said by the previous panelists also, because I think they touched on very important and relevant issues. You know, I think globally speaking, one of the things that this pandemic demonstrated to us is how fragile and how dysfunctional a lot of the international supply chains are. You see people going hungry while potatoes are not being harvested in other areas. You see in certain areas crops are dying on the field. You cannot get laborers. In other areas, like you pointed to, poor people are being sent home with nothing to go to. So I think we should also ask ourselves some fundamental questions, and in particular, when it comes to food and land use, how have we organized ourselves? You know, I would say that this is maybe an area where India is ahead of many other regions in the world. I know that there are Indian states where they have gone 100% organic, where there is really a circular economy around food. But I would say globally, what is lacking is the failure money, as Harish talked about, in terms of capital towards investments in local level business, in improvements that improve both the climate, that improve people's livelihoods, and where kind of, in development, you're not allowed to fail, yeah? But in venture capital, you can fail. So I very much agree to Harish's idea. Let's really talk about how can you put large scale finance to use in order to leverage all the creativity that is among sort of newly graduated people from vocational schools, newly graduated young people from local business schools. There's a lot that can be done in terms of creating a circular food industry, which is more short travel. So that's one area. Then sort of closer to my day job, when it comes to carbon finance, what we are trying to promote is the idea that the forests are important for carbon. They're important for water. They're important for the people who live in them. And they're extremely important for the agriculture that is around the forest. So if we are able to see this as a whole, and if we are able to reward the countries or provinces that are actually taking care of their forests, if we can put finance to them, that they could then use as part of it, they could use as failure money towards building an even stronger local rural economy, be it in electricity or in energy, which was also very eloquently pointed to, or in food production, or in other things. So one of the things that Norway is trying to do is to see, okay, there are big discussions in IPCC around Article 6 or how carbon financing should happen. But let's try to sort of leave all of the difficulties behind for a moment. So let's see what can we do now. So what we're trying to do is to see how can we put financing for forests to use for the rural economy, reward those who are doing the right things right now, and telling countries that, yes, if there's anything we do now in this mechanism that doesn't really work, once we have agreed on Article 6, we'll fix it. But let's start working now. I just want to throw out one even more provocative idea as well. So now probably my own minister will not agree with me, but I think there is now, I think was pointed to the lack of a social safety net. I think by both previous panelists as well. In Europe, we spent almost 100 years building a very complicated welfare state. A lot based on sort of, if you're in this category, you get this benefit, and if you have 2 children, you get this benefit. If your illness is like this, you get this benefit. If you're a student, you get this. I think it's really time that we start talking about a universal basic income. And especially in this situation, because like right now would be the perfect time to try it, because there are a lot of people who need help. It is very complicated to try to compensate in terms of how long have you been out of work, this and that. Let's test out universal basic income, even if it's very low, but let's test out. If you have an ID card, if you are a citizen, you get this benefit. That would be the most innovative thing to try out right now. Thank you. I spoke for a long time. Sorry.
No, thank you for that, Stig. You've raised a number of questions. Again, I'm just piling them up. There are some more questions that have come. But let me just first ask Vineet, because all of this, in fact, ties into the money question. The money question has come up a number of times in this panel. Failure money. Stig has raised basic income. I think Saurabh even talked about livelihood generation. So the money question has come up many times. So if you were to reimagine the world, let's say in 10 years from now, we remember that we have all committed as a global community that the sustainable development goals were to have been achieved or will be achieved in 10 years from now, less in fact. And then given that today our disruption is quite unprecedented, from where you sit, and given that through Avishkar, you've done anything from $500 deals all the way to over $25 million deals, how is the money behaving? How is the money looking at this current situation now?
Thank you, Moha. It's interesting to hear very different perspectives, but let's actually try to understand money. Money is by nature a very risk-averse instrument. Anybody who has the money doesn't want to let go from their hands. And therefore, it becomes incredibly difficult for money to be given away to people. Sustainable development goals are not new. 2015, the 193 governments of the world came together and imagined a world that none of us ever thought is imaginable. They said by 2030, no hunger, no poverty, no inequity, everybody will be the same, blah, blah. A world that has never existed since the time Homo sapiens started walking straight. So I think human beings assumed that this is a brave government making a statement, but unfortunately governments of the world have very limited amount of capital. Just to give you an idea, I was serving on the Business Commission for Sustainable Development, and we did a calculation and came up with a number which effectively said that the world needs to invest $2.5 trillion every year for next 20 years. We came up with our report in 2018, it was chaired by Paul Polman, which effectively meant $40 trillion. Now, the global aid all put together, includes the IFCs, the World Bank, all put together is 250 billion. The gap between what you require and what you are doing is so large that it is unthinkable you will be anywhere close to 2030 to what you are claiming. However, the money is not less. So if you're just going around looking at money, there is $200 trillion of money trying to do very silly things. So it's silly in today's time, but it was not doing silly things before that. So what has happened in last 2 months? In last 2 months, the people who are actually sitting with that $200 trillion of capital essentially constitute 0.001% of the world or 0.1% of the world. These 0.1% of the world actually suddenly for the first time since the time they started controlling money realize that the word greed is good is probably dead. The idea that you can keep actually exploiting the world to create more money is completely dead. Simply because this 200 grams of virus has taken the fear of destruction of capital. Remember, nobody wants to lose money. So the $200 trillion guy wants to go from 200 trillion to 210 trillion, but surely doesn't want to go back from 200 trillion to 150 trillion. Last 2 months have suddenly brought the idea of destruction of capital to their doorsteps. They have never thought this is possible. Suddenly the fear that everything that they have built and they control will be frittered away. Not because they lost it, because the world just stopped, has come to them. So when this fear comes, what happens? The greed is good is dead, but the result is resilience has started trumping returns. So today, everybody wants to protect the 200 trillion. And what it is doing is it is re-architecting the way capital allocation worldwide is taking place. Suddenly the guy wants to protect the money he has or she has, doesn't want to lose it, and therefore is not looking at the best return decision, is looking at what would make sure that the event that has happened does not repeat itself. Now that fear is very unique. Humanity has never experienced it ever. Not in World War I, not in World War II. And this is actually far more disruptive than both those events. So we are going through times where there is a re-architecting taking place, not because Harish and I are being very smart. It is because COVID took the fear of God into the minds of those who actually controls the pools of capital. What will this lead to? This would lead to a completely different economy. An economy where oil economy is a passé. The world was driven massively by oil economy. There is enough and many discussions around that the kind of mobility that we have today was simply influenced that people did not want the cars to change quite dramatically, efficiency to come in significantly. So that economy is not going to be there. The geopolitics of the kind that we have seen, hegemony of one or two, will not exist. So when you try to ask me to reimagine 2030, certain things will happen. The world will actually start allocating capital from now on very distinctly. And a large percentage of the capital that we are talking about will come from this $200 trillion. The quantum of capital that Harish and I has literally begged, borrowed, and steal is just insignificant to bring about any change. It can probably make Harish happy and get him an award, and make me happy and get me one award here and there, but it is not going to change anything in our lifetimes. COVID is going to put the fear of God in their hands and will push them to shove more capital towards things that they thought is not doable, simply because resilience trumps returns, and the best case scenario is not greed for good, but that resilient with return. And resilience with return would mean climate, energy, agriculture, sustainability, right in the middle and center of all decision making. So if you are going to actually look at sustainability at the core, and you'll question every investment you make with that lens, you would suddenly bring all the questions that we've been raising for hundreds of years about the world is going to dog, that Antarctica is melting, right in the boardrooms of the 0.01% of people who actually don't believe that the world is falling apart. And I think, so therefore, I believe sustainable development goals, which I actually have, as I said, was part of the report writing, etc., and I never believed it will ever be achieved. I suddenly have started believing, because we have started receiving emails from those who actually never were interested to talk to folks from Avishkar, writing to me and saying, hey man, we think that the world has changed, and I think let's actually discuss how do we actually engage in taking this world forward. So I'll conclude by saying that if you have to bring resilience, you would need to bring about a change. And just to tell you one thing, which is very critical and important, specific for Indians, the migrant labor that we actually decided to leave, that migrant labor is the most talented person from Jharkhand, UP, Bihar, because he's the most entrepreneurial. He or she is the one who actually decided. Imagine the mental capacity of a person who can walk 1,500 kilometers. That man is capable to change the world. Now what will happen is that these migrant laborers, when they go back, and if people like me have the capability and the courage to actually invest in the skills that they have developed, this is the most talented and the most skillful people who are actually working in UP, leave UP, Bihar and their villages and work in cities, are back there. They're entrepreneurial. They walk 1,500 kilometers. They're hardworking. They have a strong mind. If they are backed by capital, they will build industries in those regions. UP has a per capita income 65,000 rupees per year. Bihar has per capita income of 45,000. Jharkhand would be around the same range. And these are states which actually produce almost 60–70% of India's migrants. These are also the states that pull down India. I think, lucky for these states, COVID has actually pushed the most talented back to them. Now, what we do with these would actually completely transform India's geography and demography. So I'll hand it. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinny. This has actually raised a number of questions that I have in my head. So one immediate one, in fact, you said oil is passé, and we have Steg here sitting in Oslo. I want to ask Steg, your views. I think it's no man's secret how much of reserves Norway has built up over oil and Norwegian history with oil. So I'd be curious to hear your views on that. And linked to that, in fact, is a question that I had for Saurabh, based on discussions on failure money and the dichotomy, or let's say the dichotomy of failure money is, everyone knows in any sort of investing there is a certain level of failure. You can't win until you fail. In the development community, in the public sector community, failure is a bad word. I've had plenty of experiences with Norway. I've had plenty of experiences with bilateral agencies where you cannot declare that the money just didn't work out for what it was supposed to be, and especially if it were headed towards commercial activity. So from where you sit, from the government point of view, how does this play out? Because you've got someone saying, I need to build the entrepreneurial capacity of this force, of this skill force, and there is going to be a certain level of failure because that happens anywhere. How would you see that? So maybe let's start with Stig first, and then I'll come to Saurabh in a bit.
It was really interesting to listen to Vinit. So let me comment or follow up a little bit on that, because I think he's very right in pointing out that there is a lot of talent out there, and that investing in talented people who don't speak English is not sort of where venture capital is best. I forgot to mention, I have also worked in venture capital, so I have a little bit of experience with startups. And I just want to share sort of one observation on that. I think Vinit also touched upon it, that sometimes money goes stupid places. And at the time when I was in venture capital, any stupid business wanting to do peer-to-peer lending could easily raise $5 to $10 million, when basically what they had was a few guys in an office with a few computers and a few nice slides. Of course, most of these would fail. Some would prosper, but most would fail. While if you have a cooperative, or if you have a company that clusters or buys cocoa from sustainable coffee or cocoa producers in a geography where you actually have a company, have a processing plant, and you have developed a relationship with thousands of farmers. Currently, venture capital does not give any price on the cooperatives. So the skill of social organization is not priced. So it means that these companies are vastly underpriced. And I very much think that Vinit is right, that companies will start discovering that these are very smart investments. It's resilience. And there is a value in the social organization that will be more and more discovered. I think the same logic, in a way, Vinit to sort of what will happen post oil. A lot of people think that post oil will be a disaster for Norway. I don't think so. I think it will be difficult, but we have had experiences with low oil prices before. And in the regions that are most oil dependent, there are, of course, a lot of very entrepreneurial and very smart people. What has happened before in low conjunctures is that, yeah, they've not found the high-paying jobs that they had in the oil industry, but they have gone on to create companies onshore that have created many more jobs. So on the balance, yeah, there are people who will have a rough time in the transition from oil to non-oil business. But I don't think that you will see a situation where these people who are now in oil will stop being productive. They will do something else. So I think that is also more of an opportunity, mostly an opportunity. It is, of course, a big challenge for an oil-dependent country. But I see it mostly as an opportunity.
Okay, thanks. I'll come back in a bit. Sorry, do you want to respond on the failure money versus how development looks at it?
Before that, if you allow, I would also like to talk about oil and oil prices and where do we go from there. I mean, I will possibly say that oil is still not dead, and it's too early to write the epitaph for a very simple reason. Look at what is happening. Yes, the oil prices are falling, crashing. But what is happening in a country like India, which has now very little resources or avenues from which you can generate resources. So despite the low oil prices, you and I as consumers, nothing has changed. Some European countries have also started to increase taxes on oil, and which I feel will continue for. So at some point in time, you will start seeing the demand to rebound, and maybe it's too early to really write an epitaph for oil. But having said that, I'll come back to the question that you raised, and I'll answer it in a manner that what should the government, and particularly government and public sector in India, do? I mean, that's what your reference was in regard to the failure money. As you rightly said, off late, if a project fails, it's not seen very, very well. But if you forget about the last a couple of decades in the government, whether it is infrastructure or any other space, if you look at the classical economics of governments and markets, any new market has to be created, set up by the government. So the early risk taker is public money. Yes, over a period of time, for a variety of reasons in India, the public sector has been shy in taking risk. But I think post-COVID, there is certainly no other choice but to change the way the entire governance has been done within and outside the government. We are seeing some facets of it, some things that we never thought would ever change in this country. The labor reforms are coming through. We are looking at many other reforms in the private public sector. So I have a feeling that this whole idea of the way it is looked at, the failure money or the chances of failure from the oversight entities pre and post COVID will potentially change. That's what my feeling is.
Thank you for that. Let me come back. In fact, it's all related. Let me come back to Vineet and Harish. Vineet, I think you were. If I got all of that, you made a number of very important points. But let me just say, if you're saying that, well, capital right now is looking just for value preservation and value protection. Question is that a current situation because we're in the middle of a pandemic and everybody's flying blind? Or if I link this up with what both you and Harish were saying, that if I have to build a system that is resilient, and underneath that, of course, capital has to flow. Now, one of the biggest roadblocks, one of the biggest risks out there for the movement of capital is one of the many risks is that many of these projects that you're talking about, that Harish was talking about in the farm and non-farm sector, pottery, market linkages, and so on, they tend to have a reputation of not scaling. They have risks that capital is not able to absorb in these sorts of areas. And in investment terms, many are just not bankable. So can you reconcile these two things?
So I think
to you and to Harish.
Harish, would you like to respond? I can actually go initially on so I think these are myths that are perpetuated. When Avishkar has been investing for 20 years, we have invested in Orissa, Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, all the remote areas, in the most remote places. We have gone and created UP's first bank, the only bank that is actually scheduled bank that is registered in UP, Utkarsh Small Finance Bank. There was no idea, nothing. I just come from Banaras. I convinced the entrepreneur to go to Banaras. I gave them the money. I supported them. 2010 microfinance crisis happened. We still put in money. No government subsidy, not a single penny that came in. When it became the bank, it was inaugurated by the Prime Minister. But it actually, there is no reason for us to actually tom-tom that it cannot be done. Just to give you an idea, on March 30th, we made an investment. You asked me that question. We made an investment in a company called Argos. Argos is a green bank, operates in Samastipur in Bihar. What does Argos do? It digitizes it allows a farmer to keep a single bag of grain in a warehouse, digitizes it, helps him to sell it, get him a 70% loan, all done. Now, April 19, 2019, that company actually had, between April 2019 and April 2020, if you ask any entrepreneur what happened in April 2020, you will hear 60% revenue drop, 70%, 90%, or 100%. This is a company that has got an 800% increase in customers, 800% in April 19 and April 20, right during the lockdown. It also actually improved its revenue by 300%. 800% increase in revenue in customers, 300% increase in revenue in the month of April. How did it happen? Somebody has to take risk, and somebody has to find the right entrepreneur who is disrupting the conventional thought process. If you are going to try to keep making pottery, nothing is going to change. The entrepreneurs, and that's why I'm actually telling people are probably not recognizing the potential and the capability of individual entrepreneurs who have been exposed to what is happening in Mumbai, Delhi. When they will walk back to UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, that's the kind of talent that requires capital. The person I invested in Bihar had actually worked for 4 or 5 years at a junior level in ICICI Bank. But the kind of wisdom and smartness that he has, and not only has Avishkar put in $6-7 million, there is another $8 million that is going to flow in Bihar, all in COVID times. And this actually is just an indication of what is potentially possible. Capital is not really struck. Capital is simply because we in India are not willing to think about the quantum of capital that we need to construct India. In India, we actually only think in silos. Right now, I'm also on the social stock exchange. We are discussing, should we actually allow for-profit enterprise to be listed on social stock exchange? That's not the smartest thing to do. The world is changing. There is millions and trillions of dollars that will be available if you can actually demonstrate real impact, real change, and resilience. You can attract the world's capital here. But I think there is a huge difference between those who are actually writing the policy and those who are doing the work. We are actually working to cross purpose. I think sometimes when the policy, it happened in information technology industry, where the writers of policy and the entrepreneurs worked in tandem. I think in the space of impact and climate, the entrepreneurs on the ground, the investors, people like us who are mediocre and in between, and then finally, the policymakers, the government, the all-powerful, should work in tandem, and government will need to take the lead because it has the capability. I don't think so I want any money from the government. I really don't need the money from the government. If there is money available, we'll take it. There is enough and more money available. Government has to make sure that it doesn't make it impossible for us to do the good work we are doing. So if they can just step aside a little bit, give us a little bit space, a lot can be done. The fact that we have pumped in $1.2 billion, a guy who started with $100, and just to tell you, Stig, I'm a forester, by the way. And so I'm probably, you're the only third guy I've met in the world who's a forester and has been a venture capitalist and startup. I am not capable to be an investor or an entrepreneur. I used to live in a forest in Orissa. I chose and came out, stumbled to become an investor. I think every migrant is one potential Vineet Rai. They all can change the world. I think we are the mediocres who have the potential and capability if supported well. And I'm a great example of that. And Harish is not. He's an IIT guy. He's a brilliant. He's the cream de la cream of India. I am the mediocrity. I am the representation of the mediocrity of India.
Harish, how do we get capital to flow now? How can we combine this mediocrity that Vineet that Vineet just talked about, and he's put you into a silo that he just said that we're all guilty of?
No, I mean, I am not guilty because that's why I went out to make friends with Vineet, but he never shared any monies with me at all over the time that he has made. Yeah, I mean, coming back to this issue of money, so it's been interesting to even look at saying that risk. I mean, it's interesting to also see that institutions which are supposed to be so-called public-face institutions have actually made sure that they are safe in not expending that money. All the religious institutions in the world have basically contracted and say, we're not going to spend money in a manner they should, right? They've basically contracted saying that we need to put our reserves, which is kind of puts religious institutions hypocritical to the service they're supposed to be playing in the world today. Everybody, all religions across have said, our bank account, we need to save our fixed deposits. And for the millions of devotees have put in the money, it actually shows where has religious institutions playing a role when they are needed the most. So the question is that I'm saying that it has also today is that we're only talking one capital. And if you look at the migrants, we're not even looking at the simmering cost of potential social unrest across the world. We're not even looking at it. And that also proves today the redefinition of what we mean by scale. Now the exact people who are pushing everybody for scale 6 months down the line are saying, oh, because he scaled up too fast, he's facing the crisis now in COVID. Because he scaled too fast. Now scale has become a bad word. Because you have scaled so fast, you are now most vulnerable in these times, right? You don't have the capital to maintain the 600, 800,000 people. You scaled too fast. So the mantra of scale, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy that like the venture capitalists, as well as the people who have taken the money, in general, I'm not telling there's a certain crop of people who know what venture capital in the impact, inclusive venture capital actually means, but this blind telling that it's a pilot, you need to scale up without actually knowing what scale up means. I think that's where this is our chance to scale up processes, not just looking at focusing organizations. Can we scale up processes that evolve, that helps every individual person who has gone back to UP or Karnataka or Manipur or Meghalaya to have an equal chance that either Vinit Rai or myself or Stig or Saurav has? How do we decentralize so that the processes get scaled up? When processes get scaled up, everybody gets a chance to create an enterprise or an innovation that actually leads to equal distribution of wealth. And unfortunately, we put a stigma when we talk about good distribution of healthy distribution of wealth, reducing disparities, we're branded as leftists or we're branded as communists. But look at what has happened. Let's not go into this brand. We need to now look at disparities of wealth. And this is a chance for us to relook at capital and to decentralize and redefine what scale is. And I think our scaling is processes, not about just scaling Googles and scaling Apples and scaling. We are talking of decentralized that every individual has the capacity. And to Vinit, boss, I completely agree. I'm the question, the problem of elitism is we unfortunately consider ourselves elite. We went to IIT because 300 million Indians did not write the exam. If they had written the exam, I would not have gone into IIT. So it's an exam which is exclusive to, there's so many smart people who had got into, we all clap our back, oh, he's from IIT. Yes, you're an IIT because others didn't write the exam. If they had written the exam, you wouldn't have gone into bloody IIT. So I think similar to IIT exams, we are not making it exclusive for everybody to access that capital and the process. And this is our chance to create equalization and lessen the disparity, which is my scarcity, is that if we do not look at that disparity now, with the frustrations of what has happened in the last 20 days, should not lead to a large-scale social unrest in the future. And this is our chance to prevent that to happen.
Let me.
If I can just add one line, if I can add just one line, it is the greatness of people like Harish that he's able to acknowledge and state that that's why we need people like Harish who actually have got the elitism and are willing to actually explain why that elitism needs to be challenged. And we need leaders like Harish who actually has that capability to say it. The fact of the matter is all of us are actually, as Harish has earlier pointed out, used a language. We are the new Brahman. We are the guys who have actually used a language to make sure that the other people cannot compete with us. And we are the new Brahman. We have to kill that language hypocrisy that exists in this country. which we are focusing. हम लोग यहाँ पे भी बात कर रहे हैं. We have left out everybody else. We are only talking to a very selected 5-7% of India. And to me, that is really where our biggest damage is. We have tried to convert 1.3 billion people to leave their mother tongue and learn a language that is completely foreign to us. And we have sold this idea so deeply कि अगर अंग्रेजी नहीं बोलोगे तो आगे नहीं बढ़ सकते हो. Imagine who are you going to sell your product to in UP and Bihar if you don't know Hindi? That's really the problem. I'll stop here.
Let me push one more before I take questions from the floor. Both of you, and in fact, I'd say all of you, are basically saying, you know, the reality is our future reality needs to be a little different. I'm only being mild about everything you've been saying. And you've been saying that, you know, we need to relook at capital and processes and so on. It's going to take time. We know that. It's going to take time. One of the other allegations of the inadequate movement of capital from places that it does exist. You know, you did say that 200 trillion is lying around doing silly things, or lying around at 1% returns and looking for places to go where they can make more money. And yes, one allegation has been bankability, which I've asked before. But let me just come back and say, well, the kind of reality that you're talking about does not exist today. And if you were to build that, what kind of business models would need to change? Surely not today's business models are not taking us there. Our value is looking for growth, is looking for traditional ways of return. Climate for the longest time was an externality until we had a carbon market, and then that went away. What can I ask, in fact, all of you, if you were to rethink a couple of business models, what would they be? How would you make farm sector investments? And I know, Vineet, you've done that. You know, how would you do this at scale, given that money is still going to be measured with the parameters of yesterday?
Can I go first and then, because I just have to...
Sure, I realize you've got a time.
So question is, see, for example, when Vineet, I don't know whether you agree, I'm sure today it's not money alone, it's also the question of how we give money and how we measure money that's given. See, when we come to, especially let's look at India or a little bit in Africa, we bring in money, but the monitoring process is westernized. We create westernized principles of audit and create such restrictions, like simple thing, when we go and audit, we get into complexity of, say, simple thing like conflict of interest, right? Now, the conflict of interest, can you go and tell a farmer, don't hire your brother because that's a conflict of interest? Would we have the guts to tell the Tatas, Godrej, and the Reliances and the Birlas, while we, in the modern way of utilizing monies, we tell, oh, it's a conflict of interest, you can't. So the capital is, because then you put in the big four to audit the young farmers and say, this is a principle does not match your audit process. See, it's not only money, the whole process of how money is distributed and audited is completely against the whole concept of proprietorship and everything. How would you encourage that? It's a very hypocrisy in all the way that you have one standard for the large industries and a completely different, because the capital source and measurements are very different. So it's money as well as the transaction methodology to do it's completely wrong.
Okay. Anyone else? Because I have now, I want to bring this back to climate a little bit. Plus, there are, of course, some questions that have come up. Keeping still a climate resilience lens in mind, yeah, because, you know, we all know, thankfully, after so many years, we've all come to realize, and by say we, not just the 5% of people that you're referring to, it's now well acknowledged that climate change is affecting us very much. I myself have found roaming around the corridors, in different sorts of corridors, it's not something that used to belong to the tree huggers as it was maybe about 20 years ago. So yeah, so that's a given. Now let me just come back to some climate issues that have been raised over here. In fact, even some questions. One question that's coming in here is, when we speak of climate finance, people tend to think of it as mitigation, meaning usually large power plants. That's kind of what goes in their minds. And there's this vast expanse of forestry. And when I say forestry, and I'm extrapolating the question, not just forestry for the sake of growing trees and sucking up carbon dioxide, but most of these forests have massive livelihoods generated with them. And that's the conversation we've been having here about an alternative way of development. What are your, the question here is, what are your views? How do we change the vocabulary around climate finance? Tends to mean mitigation. And I'll leave it to you to think while I ask. There's one more question that has come in. Well, there are many questions. I'm just plucking out a few because many have been addressed already. There have been reports that COVID-19 is disrupting Asia's move to cleaner sources of energy by using stimulus money to bring about more, to encourage fossil fuel producers. Would anyone like to comment on this? So let's do the forest piece first and climate finance, and then the Asian fossil fuel issue.
If you're fine, I can just very quickly respond. Otherwise, I think Stig or Mr. Saurabh Kumar can go ahead.
Let me just ask Harish, Vineet, I know he has to go. He's got another meeting at 7. Harish, would you like to comment before you?
See, yeah, so how do we see, the thing is that the issue is, how do we institutionalize the word climate in all finance? See, that today what has happened is, rather than looking at climate finance, saying that if I just pick up one example, like NABARD, right? NABARD, for example, and saying that all finance that NABARD does is basically focused towards agriculture and rural allied services, right? And if climate becomes an automatically institutionalized process, that you don't think climate as a separate climate finance, because anything that NABARD does, whether it's agriculture, water pumping, fertilizer, everything, we build in the concept of it automatically. So it's not an afterthought. We do not have a department of racism. It is an automatically institutionalized process of equality. So I think if organizations like NABARD, organizations like RBI, or institutionalize climate and say, for example, if I have to do 10,000 crore financing for water and allied services in the rural areas, I would bring in efficiency of all equipment, just like Saurabh has done in terms of light. All water pumps are highly efficient. How do you look at drip irrigation? How do you look at drought-related conditions to the hilly terrains of Assam where the floods happen? I bring in the whole concept of interventions that climate becomes institutionalized. We don't, and that's the issue. Today we use climate as a separate term and plug it in. And we as a country, India, has a wonderful chance. If you look at NABARD, if you look at RABAI, if you look at cooperatives, farmer cooperatives, rather from a rice cooperative to a cocoa cooperative to an agriculture cooperative, to rubber association, we start creating appropriate mechanisms that how financing should be done, and financing should be done only if they are resilient to the environment and to the people. And that's a very easy thing to do, because we have structures are a little bit centralized, but a lot of it is decentralized. Use those to make it institutional. Climate has to be institutionalized, not a separate word.
Okay. Vineet, you had something.
So I'll give some ideas. I'm actually, being a forester, there's a lot of NTFPs, many other things that takes place in forest. I think the critical area is that the land reform that will follow COVID.
Yeah.
You heard about Prime Minister talking about liquidity, land, labor, and laws. I think those are the two very critical ones that needs to be addressed at, because today in India, you can't actually make any investments in forest.
Yeah.
It's totally out of bound for you. So what can anybody do? Nothing can be done in India for sure. But let me actually give you an example that takes on what Harish was talking about. Harish mentioned about there is a need for everything to come together. How about, let's say, millets? Millets is an original. Rice and wheat are both foreign to Indians, just so that we all know. It is millets, jowar, bajra, ragi, that is what Indians used to eat. 200 years on, today we are diabetes capital of the world because we actually eat something that is alien to our bodies. Now, what is millet? Millet is actually a hardy dryland crop. Why is it a hardy dryland crop? Because it can grow without really depending on seeking much water. Now, because it does not seek much water, it is also actually not a very tasty crop. So how do you now bring millets back? The destruction of millet cultivation is just phenomenal. Today, I think we produce only 20,000 metric tons of millets. Now, how do you bring it back? So we made an investment in a company that is converting ragi into breakfast cereal, a company known as Soulful. soulful brand, which a lot of people probably listening to me might be eating. Now, these people were passionate about bringing ragi back to the table and making young Indians, North and South India, both to eat ragi while they eat their breakfast cereal. So what you require is innovation. You require new thinking. You need to look beyond the obvious. And therefore, when you talk about climate, you talk about energy, you need to actually say that if I am conserving water and I am moving India away or getting a large amount of dry land back into cultivation, which is lying fallow, we are bringing in new foods that would actually make Indians healthy. At the same time, will save India from water issue. You are servicing, that's climate finance. Because ultimately, what is climate? Climate, whether the challenges that we have, artificial through, it's all because of the heat that is causing all those things. There are artificial things that are doing. Oil, which itself creates so much of carbon dioxide release in the environment. All these things are what are causing the challenges that we are dealing with. So I think financing, therefore, has to take climate not into very rigid aspects of forestry or reducing ozone depleting gases. That's not the only way. That's why it's seen as mitigant or taking out coal thermal powered power plants, but to actually promote those ideas that could bring business and climate in congruence. Right now, it is seen as an anti-business activity, and therefore climate finance is seen as a negative. It's seen as a mitigant, not necessarily a positive creator. We have to change that image.
Saurabh, do you agree that given all your work at ESL would probably qualify as climate finance? Would you agree that climate, what's your view that, is climate looked at as a pain?
No, I mean, certainly, I mean, to answer your last question, certainly whatever we do is in furtherance of climate goal. But let me go back to a question that you raised, that someone said that South Asia is actually, all these packages are kind of promoting fossil fuels. Honestly speaking, if you view this in a very short term, yes, absolutely correct. Yes, I mean, it's a pleasure listening to both Vineet and Harish, and what they say, I completely agree. But then, having said that, one has to also ponder that in any public system, any governance system, whether in India or abroad, in a pandemic, in a catastrophe like this, there has to be 2 or 3 stages. First, you have to stabilize what you have, which is what I think most countries in Asia and outside are also doing. Whether it is fossil or it is not fossil is a separate matter. The fact is today, distribution utilities have no money. You have to subsidize because it spurs off a chain reaction across variety of economic activities. So yes, if you look at it from a short-term perspective, yes, absolutely correct. 70% of India's energy is from fossil. Certainly this will market criticism. Having said that, what can change and what should change? And again, coming back to the failure money part of it. How do you create that scale in a very quick time? Yes, of course, innovations will happen. I completely agree with Vineet that you have the skilled workforce across various spectrum, but can you refocus and scale at let's say a village level? You've used fiscal incentives to drive industries in backward areas, but can you do something in the farm sector? So let's look at what is it that people so far have not ventured into farm sector on scale. I mean, surely there are plenty of examples of individual entrepreneurship. Essentially, the risk of given that the economy in rural areas is not as robust as it is outside, the demand. Can you create using public money? And now I'm using the word public money, which includes money from public sources, and I will also include climate finance. Can we create a system where there is enough protections, quote unquote, for an investor to come towards these very important activities that Vineet mentioned, whether it is in farming, new kinds of farming, water conservation, which is going to be a big challenge in countries like India, and so on and so forth. Can we create new, not really an instrument, but something that encourages new instruments, a sort of risk guarantee, could be some sort of a enabling grant, and so on and so forth. I must say, I mean, what government announced yesterday in the package, almost $10 billion is being talked about in subordinate debt and equity for small and medium enterprises. Can we not blend it with certain other, let's say, climate finance to push these industries towards the rural area? So I think that is where we need to possibly work on after we stabilize what we have in the next phase. This is the golden chance for everyone, including India, to, as everybody said, to include sustainability in whatever we do, and make sure that whatever growth is coming up is in terms clean, green, and the most climate resilient.
Thanks for that, Saurabh. We've got the last 5 minutes. I want to make one quick round of questions that have come in from here. Just one question, and I think you touched upon it a little bit, Saurabh. Now, if we were questions have come in on blended finance, and some of what you said was the use of public money to, if I can say, foster innovation. You know, when you're talking about innovation, we need to think a little bit differently. Well, part of the problem of thinking differently is that leaves behind this little risk tail. Does anyone want to say something about the role of, you know, what all do we need to do? What sorts of instruments do we need and should we have on the table?
Okay, let me, since you referred to, what I feel is that the role of government needs to change drastically. And to give an example, and I'll come to the question that you had. I don't know if everybody else knows that India only had an information technology ministry only in the in the first 5 years of this new century. By that time, India had already become an IT powerhouse. So I mean, I'm not saying that you don't do anything and we still get there, but the role of government, which has been on kind of a licensing, creating, I mean, approvals and so on and so forth, has to change to being an enabler, has to change to create these innovative risk mitigation mechanisms, these venture capital funding. And I said something that we saw yesterday. Again, we'll have to wait and see what the fine print is, but I have not seen a venture capital fund being set up by government at that scale. So maybe these are things that we need as the public sector to do, and enable entrepreneurs like Vineet and Harish and many others to flourish under this.
Harish, is Harish still here? Harish, are you still here? No, I think Harish has had to leave. Sorry, he had something else to go. Vineet, any responses to that?
I agree to all of that. But I want to come back to something that Vineet touched upon, because I think it's extremely important, and that is sort of to promote local, traditional produce. If you talk to the really big food companies now, the Nestle's, the Unilevers, you probably have companies similar size in India as well. What they will say is, "Oh, we would like to buy more from smallholders, but they cannot deliver at the scale that we need." I think the approach is completely wrong. They need to have buying agreements with cooperatives saying, "We will buy what you have at an agreed minimum price." They need to not tell farmers that they need to start growing palm oil. They need to buy the millets. They need to develop markets for that. They need to say that, yes, we have long-term buying agreements with farmers in X, Y, Z, and none of those are poor because they have a guaranteed minimum income. That will also create the resilience and the sustainability that we need. And of course, this needs to be coupled also to protection of the environment, or protection of nature. I think in general, sort of nature in terms of climate. I think the debate needs to be switched a little bit around. I mean, now people tend to see nature sort of as a subset of climate. I think it's the other way around. The climate problems we have are due to us not treating nature the way we should. If we want a resilient economy, we need to make nature resilient. That means protecting whatever nature we have left, expanding it, connecting the bits and pieces of nature that we have left. That is where we want to make money available at scale, and where basically the idea that we have, maybe to answer a bit on how governments can be creative, is that Norway will try to guarantee a minimum price on carbon, but try also to involve really big emitting companies that cannot make the full transition to carbon neutrality yet, who have to buy offsets. So in that way, we want to use our money as a guarantee, and it can be drawn on, but also try to pull in a joint effort to drop private sector and governments to really fight to protect nature at a completely different scale. And then hopefully the governments that receive the money, the local governments at the end of the day, will invest the climate dividend that they get in more resilient local businesses. That would be sort of the virtuous circle that I would like to see happening.
Thanks for that. Vineet, any last comments on what instruments need to be on the table?
Well, I think the instruments are all on the table irrespective. You have equity, you have mezzanine, you have bonds, you have zero bonds, you have guaranteed bonds. I don't think so there is actually a dearth of instruments. I think there is probably the audience are very interested in knowing the number of instruments, but I think that's actually already available. A wide variety of instruments are available. Do you actually have the right combination of the instrument, and you have right combination of entrepreneurs with right ideas to actually accept those instruments? As I already said, there's a combination of land, law, and then there is a combination of desire on parts. For example, just to give you an idea, European Investment Bank, and EIB, even the Norwegian entities are not necessarily actually supporting anything that's happening in India. So there is a lot of pool of capital, global pool of capital that is interested in changes to happen. Those changes can happen only if we are able to come up with right kinds of projects that could actually attract the capital. If I go and try to speak to and try to do a fundraise, most of the people in Europe are interested if you are trying to come up with a climate resilience fund. A climate resilience fund is better than just pure climate finance, because then it becomes a very vague terminology. And you try to then come up with these business models that you can serve. Now, if you try to look at a solar startup and try to say, which is actually doing, setting up or trying to provide electricity as alternate electricity to people, whether industrial or residential, how do you finance that? Because this company, what we have learned over a period of time, becomes a highly specialized EPC. What kind of returns would you generate? How do you actually create an exit out of these entities? Which requires all restructuring or re-engineering of thought process. Restructuring of and re-engineering of thought process at the entrepreneur level. There is a re-engineering and restructuring of thought process at the capital level, where a pure play venture capital fund should not be investing in a solar EPC company. It should be backed by debt / corporate guarantees like Stig mentioned about, that you need to have either a government guarantee that at some point of time, you will be able, in the worst case scenario, if you're not able to find a market exit, you will be able to get an exit. Otherwise, you will not be able to attract the capital. So the instruments need to get those blended finance capital. And the problem with the blended finance part of it is largely international. Within international, it is largely European. And since it is European, you will have to actually go and collect that amount. The quantum of that capital and the demands for a country like India are significantly at divergence. So even if, let's say, I raise a $100 million fund, what kind of climate change would I be able to create in India? And therefore, it's a slightly more complex requirement, a complex thought process, and probably government of India will have to also participate, like it is doing the MSME fund and it is doing the fund of funds for startups. It might at some point of time will have to consider launching 1 billion, 2 billion, or a 5 billion climate resilience fund, which will allow people the opportunity to come up with creative products and creative financial systems that may make a difference.
Cool, thank you for this. I think I'm getting some messages that the Nudge Foundation needs to, the other panel needs to start, and we'll need to give some time for them. I think this gets us to the end of this session. I have tried my best to, for the interest of the audience, to respond to the many questions that have come. Many of them were similar. This has been a really engaging discussion. And like I was telling the audience, you know, we've got a really passionate, energetic, visionary panel. And I think all you panelists lived up to that introduction. So thank you for doing that. This was a fantastic panel. I think the nice takeaway is that everybody here on this panel, and this is we've got a diverse set of people. You're basically all saying that we need a new reality. Completely agree, absolutely. But you're also nicely saying that this new reality is actually very possible. The instruments are all there. There's a role of government. In fact, it was really nice to hear Saurabh and Stig, two different governments, mostly saying that governments need to become a bit of an enabler and take price risk and take guarantees and things like that, become a market maker, as opposed to other roles the government have. And this is a good time to step up on that. So thank you for all the time that you've spent on this. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for engaging with each other and with the audience. And I'll also just thank the audience. There have been plenty of questions coming in. Thank you for engaging, and I must apologize for the many other questions that I'm unable to take right now because I have to let go of this session in preparation for the next one. Must thank the Nudge Foundation. They've done a fantastic job of putting this together. There are plenty of other panels, in fact, that you should look out for. I believe the next one is Kailash Satyarthi's session at Chacha 2020. So if you're interested, you should, maybe, I don't know if you should stay on this link, but maybe come back. It starts at 7:30. So thank you again for Nudge Foundation. Thank you to Shloka. I'm not sure if she's still here. She is here. Thank you to ICC and to all of you. And I hope I can see you in a real life situation sometime soon. And I hope that you will also all work together to break these same silos that you've said are painful. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being part of this. And thank you to all the other panelists. I really enjoyed getting to know you.
Thanks, Dick. Thanks for that.